Parallax, where we look at life from how we work. Joining us today is Pastor Barry Hargrove. He was featured on Parallax a couple of weeks back, but we've invited him back to talk a little bit more about some of the job descriptions that fall under the role of pastor. So Pastor, welcome back to Parallax.
Thank you for having me back.
I'd like to speak a little bit more about the social justice responsibility that a pastor has to community and to your congregation.
Well, that's a personal choice for me in my ministry. I am very committed to social justice, and in fact, the larger organization that our church belongs to, we're broken into conventions within the Baptist Church. It's called the Progressive National Baptist Convention. And this was the group of Baptist churches that actually gave Dr. Martin Luther King a platform from which to speak, because he wasn't necessarily well received by all Black Baptist churches. And so from that tradition, I've learned to craft my ministry, and have come to understand the importance of social justice. In my belief, Christ was about social justice.
Can you talk a little bit about the historic roots of the African American church and where that intersects with social justice and social issues?
Sure. I would actually recommend a wonderful book called The History of the Black Church by C. Everett Lincoln and Dr. Mamiya, which kind of gives a real good chronicle of how the church became this hub for seeking social justice from the institutional church, which we were in the early part of the 20th century, which meant that we dealt with all needs within our community. There was segregation, and so we became the go-to for even insurance, for educational issues, things like that, to the civil rights movement, the early days of the civil rights movement, where Dr. King was a local pastor himself, leading the Montgomery bus boycotts.
We're taping this on Friday. Mm-hmm. This will post on Monday. But today the committee presented what they've come to the conclusions of, and, mm-hmm. and what are your impressions?
I will say this, that I was very impressed with the how quickly the state's attorney came out with a statement, and I was very struck with how strong it was. I did not necessarily expect that, and so what I think it did, I think that she indicated in her statement that she's heard the cries of our protesters, our young people, crying no justice, no peace, and it was her hope to, with these charges, that she can at least bring the pursuit of justice one step closer to its final realization. I'm hopeful for a fair and transparent process in light of what we saw today. And I'm hoping that this results in a weekend where our demonstrations of righteous indignation can also be celebrations of hope that we'll be able to find some measure of justice.
So what are some of the underlying factors that led to the uprising?
Sure. I think that Baltimore and many cities like Baltimore, they're powder kegs. We're talking about generations of hostility and tension between the police and law enforcement and Black communities and poor communities. But I think that whenever frustration hits a boiling point, there's no rationality behind it. And young people don't always think the next step ahead. Well, if I burn this CVS, how's my grandmother who lives in this senior citizen center next door going to get her prescriptions? They don't think about those things. And I thought what we saw, particularly on the first day, was this defiance that young people were showing against police officers. Many of them may or may not have had personal interactions, but they know people who have. They've heard about interactions. They've seen these things happen. And I think that, the powder keg just blew.
So Pastor Barry, this powder keg that you're speaking about isn't something new. This is
right.
Something that's been brewing for quite a while,
mm-hmm.
and really escalating over the last couple of weeks and months. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing in your congregation and maybe in the greater Baltimore area.
Sure. We have to stop and try to figure out a way to get people to stop always assuming the worst of our young people. They're still endowed with great potential if the resources are there to pull that potential out.
And protesting and holding marches is one way to start trying to stem the tide.
Yes, one of the things about, I always say, we have to move beyond the march. And that, if we're going to, marching is fine and protesting is fine, but we need to come out of it with an agenda and a plan, which is what I'm hoping happens in this case, that there is, and there's no one agenda, but we have to be able to commit ourselves to something.
Thank you so much for coming back on the show, Pastor Barry. You can find out more about the Prince of Peace Baptist Church on their Facebook page. It's located on North Linwood, so there's a few different ones on Facebook, but theirs is the one in Baltimore on North Linwood. And until next time, keep it between the white line and the ditches.